So we've just heard a lot about mobile money, and so this is going to be a kind of a different element of recognizing how the cell phone can really transform in a very simple way, and actually a much simpler way, the way people engage in financial services. So the basic idea here is somewhat simple, which is that we all of a sudden have a mechanism for communicating with people that was otherwise not available. And then we started thinking about, well, what are the issues, what are the impediments on a daily basis in terms of one's daily life to engaging in savings behavior, to saving. And kind of a parallel question to that is to point out that a lot of times when we think about savings for the poor, sometimes there's a very knee-jerk answer which comes back, which is to say, people are poor, they don't have money to save. We have to do something about income. That's what we need to solve. And so, in some sense, what we started off with was a two-prong attack. One was trying to think about how we can be using communications and messaging to change behavior. But a second question was a little bit subtler and more fundamental, was just to say, look, if simple messaging can actually change behavior in savings, it does make a very simple demonstration of the point that even when someone is really poor, there are choices they have. They're starved. They're not good choices. They're not choices we'd like. We'd like them to have more choices. But there are choices that people have even when they're poor. And if we can see important shifts in the way they allocate their money from consumption now to consumption later merely through messaging, it just makes a very simple base point of there being room for manipulation in a good way to helping people use the resources they currently have without actually expanding their resources to use financial services to achieve their goals. So what I'm going to present to you now is a combination of 3 different studies. This work is joint with Maggie McConnell, Sendhil Molnathan, and Jonathan Zinman. So first is just a little bit of background also on when we think about whether people are saving optimally. This is sometimes often a controversial statement. There's sometimes an assumption that people are optimizing. People, if they're not saving much, it's because they don't have much money and they're doing what is optimal for them. There's a couple things that I think are helpful to think through when you want to talk about why we think someone is undersaving. We want to be a little bit clear about why we think they're undersaving, rather than just looking at their state of savings and saying, that's low, we want it to go up. So we have to think about why we think, given the choices people have, they might actually not save as much as they themselves in a moment of reflection would want to save. So one of the standard kind of go-to reasons that people often use for this has to do with inconsistent choices over time. This idea that people, and this is behind some of the work that you saw a lot of people presenting yesterday about commitment products of some form, either strong or weak type commitment products. And the basic idea here is that we all have goals in life that we don't achieve and that we later regret not achieving. That we later regret not taking the steps necessary to achieve in particular. And then we do it again, right? So some people, maybe it's about stopping smoking. I want to stop smoking, I say I'm going to do it, I don't do it, I look back, I go, gee shucks, why didn't I do it? Okay, I didn't do it, but I will do it next month, and then they don't do it, and you go on and on. Or maybe it's about healthy eating, or exercising more. So we all have these different facets, and the idea is that on savings, that is true for many people as well. That we say we want to save more, but then we get tempted by a pair of shoes or a tie, or we get tempted by dessert, which could be the food issue, but it also could just be a money issue. And then you end up not accumulating as much money as you'd like for that longer term thing, which is less salient in your mind. It is a goal, it is in the future, but it's less salient and it just doesn't get nearly the same attention in your mind as the thing that's right here in front of you tempting you. So this is the idea behind commitment accounts, and there's a few different ways of thinking about it from a theoretical perspective, but the most important part about it is that if someone is inconsistent in this way, if someone does have temptation issues which lead them to spending more of their free cash than they'd like to, One of the expressions I've often heard in many countries is some form of cash burns a hole in your pocket. Cash just kind of goes out on things you don't want, that you later regret. So the key is, if this is the right explanation for why people undersave, it implies that there's going to be a preference for a commitment device. Something in a moment of reflection where someone can say, aha, yes, cash does burn a hole in my pocket, so I am going to want a commitment device. What it doesn't say is that sending someone a text message reminding them to save should have any impact whatsoever. It has nothing to say about that. So it's just part of why, I forgot I had this up here. So this is an example of a alarm clock that burns money. So if you press the snooze button, you see there's a dollar bill on the top there? And so that's basically a mechanical device. It has an alarm on it, and if you press the snooze, it'll do what the snooze button does, which is then go off again 10 minutes later. But every time you do it, a dollar bill goes into the machine and gets shredded. And so this is a simple commitment device to not hit the snooze button. Another option is obviously to buy an alarm clock without a snooze button. But they don't exist, oddly enough. I've looked many times. I pressed the snooze button twice this morning. I regret both of them. But another explanation is inattention. And we're not putting this forward as a critique of time inconsistent preferences. I'm a big fan of those, as well as an explanation of many people's behavior, or many things, including my own. So this is an as well as explanation, because as with most things in life, there's no one simple explanation for all people. Now, inattention can be on many forms. Let's think through three in particular. It could be about inattention to your future needs in life. So maybe if you ask someone right now, what are the things you need to save for? And they'll say, well, I need to save for health, I need to save for education for my children. Yeah, that's about it. And then you say, well, what about housing? Do you need to save up for improvements in your house? Oh yeah, that's true. But the point is that not necessarily everything is always on the top of their mind in terms of their future needs. And so now if you think about someone who's forgetting some of their future expenses that they need to save for, and you ask yourself, how much are they going to save? Well, they're going to, if they can think about all of their income that they are going to make, but they're underestimating their future expenses that they have in life, that means they're going to undersave, because they're going to think they have more free cash flow to spend right now because they're forgetting about some of the things they need to save for. Right, so that's one model of inattention that would suggest that reminding them about future expenses should lead to higher savings. It could obviously go the other way. They could actually be overthinking future expenses and overestimating future expenses, and thus oversaving. So this type of thinking about trying to understand what is on people's mind and what is their estimate of their future needs could go either way in theory. A second could be about income sources. Right? Maybe they're just not thinking through all of their future income sources, and that also leads them to make underestimates or overestimates of their future income, which could lead to suboptimal decisions in terms of saving. A third, though, is more about task management. Maybe, and this is the one, at least when I think about my own life, is I'm more endeared because I'm somewhat of a forgetful person often. And so I built in lots of contraptions to kind of solve my inattention problems, things like sending myself emails or sending my wife an email saying, please don't let me forget to blah. But we could all imagine thinking to our daily life, how many days we go to bed thinking, oh, I forgot to do that. Right? There was something you were supposed to do. Oh, I forgot about that. Right? So how much, when we're in some countries, for instance in the United States, there's many things in place that make that easy for us to not have to think about savings. So as an example, I work at Yale University and I get paid every month, and they automatically take out of my paycheck money and put it into a retirement savings account. I don't have to think about it. If anything, I might actually be, I don't know, maybe I'm over savings. Maybe it happens and I should be saving less, but it doesn't happen I don't have to pay any attention to it whatsoever. I had to pay attention to it only when I started the job to sign up, to fill out the little form and say, yes, go ahead and do this. After that, I don't have to pay any attention. But if you're an unwilling entrepreneur selling shoes on the side of the street in Kampala, Uganda, right, there is no way of automating yourself into savings, right? So your attention needs to be on it, whereas in some settings you actually might want the attention to be off of this. But for someone in Kampala, Uganda, selling something on the side of a street or in a local market, this is someone who might need to have a reminder about the daily task in order to make sure that it gets incorporated into their daily routine. Okay, so, so there's many examples from other domains in which sending people reminders has changed behavior in important ways. One of the underlying ideas behind this is that it is difficult when we think about future income. We often have a somewhat stable source of income, or at least a very singular source of income, or two. Right? We're either an entrepreneur, it's our enterprise, that's it. Or we have a job, we have a paycheck, and that's our income. But with expenses, there's many things all over the place. And one thing that's true is that we're not very good often at filling in the other category of life. So as an example, suppose that I didn't show up this morning to this lecture. And so we were up front, and everybody was, and our moderator came up and said, well, we have a problem. Or maybe it's a good thing, maybe, Billy can talk for twice as long. But we have a change in the plan. And asked everybody to fill out on a piece of paper, why do you think Dean didn't show up this morning? And took this half of the room and had you choose where you had to put down probabilities between he's pressed the snooze button too many times and he's still sleeping in his room. He became ill and is checked into the local health clinic, or or that's it. And then there's just an other category. So those are the two options, and then there's an other, and you have to assign probabilities. And then the other half of the room got those same two things, but then got a third option of he went to the wrong room and he's back where we had dinner and thinking that's where the lecture is, wondering where everybody else is. I'm making something up, right? But the point is there's that and then there's the other. Now in theory, these two groups, the group over here, if we added up the probability of other to the probability that I was in the wrong room, that should equal the group over here's other category. It should be the same. Okay, but when you do this type of exercise, it never is. Right? We'll end up with a bigger number over here the minute you start putting ideas into what is inside that other box, and you'll end up with that box growing and growing and growing and becoming bigger. So one idea behind that is that the prediction out of this is that reminders will increase savings, but specifically they'll do it even more if the reminder is reminding people about future expenses. If that's the issue, that people are, when thinking through all their future expenses, are just leaving some out, then reminding them about future expenses in particular will help to increase savings. So let me now go to the nuts and bolts of what we've done. I'm going to focus on the Philippine study to give you an example. We are, and for those of you who are, I know some people are coming to a replication meeting that we're having later, where we're looking to do a lot more experiments using these text messaging. So this study was done in the Philippines in a market with entrepreneurs such as this woman here. It was done on top of a commitment savings account that is similar to some of the stuff that you heard about yesterday, where clients had a certain goal that they were trying to save for that was somewhere between 3 months and 2 years away. And they also got a little bit of reward in the sense that the bank would give them a higher interest rate if they satisfied their goal. So this was done with, there were 10,000 offers made through a door-to-door campaign with 2,300 accounts opened. So the study that I'm now presenting on, though, has to do with the 2/3 of the 2,300. So 66% of the people who opened up an account had a cell phone. And so this study is now on those 2,300 people who had a cell phone, where we then tested out different ways of sending text messaging. What am I doing? So just to give you some concrete examples here of how this was set up, we had the 2,314 account holders. I'm sorry, that should actually say 2/3 of that because it's just the people with the cell phones. Regular reminder and then no regular reminder. And then we also had a second reminder that was sent with a separate randomization. If they were late for making their savings payment, because it was part of this commitment account, as part of that commitment account, they made a pledge to make a monthly savings deposit. And so late by late, what we mean is they didn't make that month's deposit. So we also had different ways of phrasing this. This is motivated from marketing and psychology literature. These gains and losses, it turns out, didn't really matter the way we phrased it, but what we did is we said, for the gain frame, what we said is frequent deposit into the savings account will make your dream come true, versus the loss frame, which was said, if you don't frequently deposit, your dream will not come true. Right? It turns out this is one of those ideas that there's a lot of evidence that these types of framing do matter, but there's also evidence that doesn't always matter. And we took our best shot at this, and the marketing people in the Philippines also thought these were good ideas to test and had strong opinions, but needless to say, it didn't turn out to matter. The overall results, we're doing one other site in Ecuador where the results are ongoing. We see an increase in savings balance by 6%. Now, 6% on one level is really small, but on the other hand, this is huge compared to the cost of sending a simple text message. When we look at whether people achieve their goal, this is just looking at the overall effect of getting a text message. Like I said, there was no differential effects from the different types of messages we sent. It was just merely getting the message. If we look at, because we have this as a goal savings account, we can also look at the probability that they just achieve their goal, period, yes or no. And that actually goes up by 3 percentage points. That's actually a huge increase of 3 percentage points when you think about it relative to the cost. Right? It goes back to many things and many themes that you've heard in other lectures, including the one that I started with yesterday in the morning, in which we talked about how we care not just about the impact of something, but the impact per dollar spent. Right? In some sense, you have to do the second part in order to get to actual policy prescriptions. Because we all know we could spend a lot of money and make some changes. The question is, given limited resources, how can we make the biggest bang for our buck? And so a 3 percentage point increase is actually pretty big compared to the cost of sending simple text messages, particularly as we're seeing the price of text messages go down and down. In the Philippines, it costs $2 US to send a text message. There are some important questions that we are not able to answer from this that have whet our appetite to do a lot more. Particularly questions about the timing. What is the optimal timing for sending these types of messages? What's the duration? Can you create habit? Is there a point at which we can stop and the habit is then formed and they're kind of hooked with the idea and seeing the benefits? Similarly, one big issue with savings that we always want to know, but is often very difficult to know, is are we just having people move their savings around from one place to another, or do we actually increase savings? Now, when your impact on savings is very small, it's hard to measure that, particularly given all of the informal ways that people can save. So we can say more concretely that we've increased savings within the formal sector, within banks, which is a good thing if the banks are safer than informal savings. But it's very hard to know whether we have done that by them merely reducing the savings that they were keeping under the mattress, or reducing the number of chickens they bought, or whether they actually cut back on some temptation consumption item and instead are saving up for larger consumption, durable type goods for the future. I alluded to one result in the very beginning where we focused the reminder on future expenses. And that was the only place we tested that was in Peru, where we found a big difference when the actual reminder talked about the future expense, reminded them, hey, you said you're saving for a car, you said you're saving for your children's education, don't forget that. And when we did that, that actually had a much bigger effect on the effectiveness of the reminders than the generic reminders. 0 minutes. I think I'm on the last slide. Yeah, a little more or less. So I'm going to skip through these, just partly because we're going to talk more about them at the very end in the reminders discussion for the application studies. There's a lot more work that needs to be done. As with any study that you see, there's always this fine balance between how much you learn from one place and one country and one point in time from one study, and there's always an eagerness to take this particular study and think about the policy implications from it. And 1 is better than 0, and 2 is better than 1. And I never know exactly where to say to people should be enough that we can stop doing research and just go and implement policy. But I can say that with reminders, there's a lot more that seems viable to be learning about how to use this amazing device now that we have at our disposal for communication with people in mass in really cheap ways, to make people's lives better off and help them use financial services to improve the way they manage their life. And so we have this great tool, and there's a lot of different questions now that we can be asking through this mechanism in a much cheaper way than the way a lot of research often is done, because we don't have to do massive survey work and very difficult outreach to people. If we are working with people through cell phones, there's just a very much simpler way of running large quantitative type tests of this nature. And so we're very excited about this as a tool for using communication in mass to help people engage better with financial services, and also for setting up a series of replication studies that really allow us to get beyond it worked in that one place, what do we do now, and onto, well, no, we've actually tested this in 12 places and it worked in 9 of them, and here's the pattern for when it's working. So that's where we're going in this direction in order to answer these questions more robustly. So the overall goal is a 3-year study with 10 or so partners. The idea is to do 30 or so experiments as part of a collection of studies that will then all speak to each other in order to create a larger set of lessons that are then implementable without further research. I'm going to skip these open questions, but we'll get to them later, and say thank you very much, everyone.